There's a lot you can learn from Out of the Past. Hi everybody, Jim Marushin, curator of the Martin County Historical Society here. We are shooting the introduction for one of our episodes of the new season, season 4 of Out of the Past, our show where we interview lots of interesting people, lots of wonderful stories. Today, we're down here in the Carlson Room of the Martin County Historical Society. If you'd like to come visit us, there's a lot of awesome things in this room. We've got a Model T Ford, we've got an agricultural display, a 1920s fire truck, the original KSUM transmitter, very cool sight to see. So yeah, please stop down and see these things after you watch this episode. And today I am joined by Lenny. What are you doing in there?
Well, I'm kind of on a work release program, I guess, and today we're going to have an interview with Blake Davis.
Okay.
He has quite an interesting background. 1985 graduate of Fairmont High School. So let's take a look at it.
Yeah, before they come put you back in.
Hey, yeah, you got that. Okay, Blake, well, thank you for coming. Appreciate it. And for doing the annual meeting tonight.
Yes.
That's great. You've had kind of a unique career, I think, anyway. What inspired you or gave you some ideas about going into corrections?
I really had thought about going to law school when I was going to Gustavus years ago, and it was an internship opportunity that I had. I had went down to the internship office, and an alumnus named Norman Carlson had set up a internship, and he was the director of the federal prison system, and had set up an internship where you did 3 months in Washington, D.C. as his intern, and then you could go to any federal prison in the country and finish the last 3 months. It was paid, and after doing that for 6 months, they offered you a position. And so I just said, well, I'm going to take a couple of years off and work in the prison industry. And it was exciting at the time because I was actually working with the head of the federal prison system in Washington, D.C. And then got hands-on work, and I thought it would be great. Maybe a couple of years from that period, I would go back to law school, but 25 years later, I retired. So
you did the internship in Washington, D.C.?
Yep, 3 months in Washington, D.C., right on First Street, right next to the Capitol. And then I spent 3 months in Phoenix at the medium security facility in Phoenix, where you worked kind of for the warden. You did some case management. You worked in the records office. They moved you around, gave you some experience in different areas. And then I went back and graduated my senior year, and then they offered me a position. I started
back in Arizona.
Yeah, back in Arizona. I finished in Gustavus on a Friday, and got married the next Saturday, and 2 days later we headed down to Phoenix, Arizona.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
You must have some unique experiences during that time, and maybe some highlights and maybe some lowlights.
Yeah.
What are some of the things you experienced during your career in corrections?
Well, starting off as a correctional officer is kind of humbling. You're working security, you're riding the perimeter patrol, you're doing a lot of security work on the recreation yard. The first day of work, they throw you a set of keys and you walk in, and you're a 21-year-old kind of wet behind the ears, and you're running a housing unit with 250 gang members and high security guys, and you have to learn in a short period of time what to do and to depend on your other teammates. So that was humbling starting off, but in a 25-year period, I'd say probably the most exciting place that I ever worked and the most challenging was the administrative maximum in Florence, Colorado. And I had 2 opportunities to work at that facility. The first time I was the public affairs officer and kind of the media guy. Sure. And that was in 1998 to 2001. And at that time we had Theodore Kaczynski, the Unabomber, we had Timothy McVeigh, we had every gang leader in the country, cartel members, the World Trade Center bomber from 1993. Wow. And so we had a little everybody, and I spoke Oprah one day, and I'd speak to Larry King the next day, and so
Really?
so we did a lot of on-camera work with folks, and
What's that called, the Supermax?
it was the Supermax. Yeah, it was really the Supermax history is you had the Alcatraz facility, then it was closed, and they moved into Marion, Illinois, and then the ADX Florence, the administrative maximum, was really the first true Supermax that the federal prison system ever had. It was opened in the early 90s and housed 495 of the worst inmates in the country. And at the time when I retired in 2013, we had 220,000 inmates. And these were the worst 495 inmates.
Wow.
They really were the inmates that you couldn't manage any other place, and you kept the rest of the system safe by housing them there. But I was the media guy for the first time and had a great experience of doing that and doing a lot of the strategic planning for the facility. Then 10 years later, I came back as the warden, and very interesting warden. I was a warden at a number of places, but this place not only presented very challenging security issues, it really challenged you in the way of managing things politically, because we had every visitor that you could ever imagine, from the Attorney General to the Deputy Attorney General to governors to senators to heads of corrections from all over the world. And if you made a mistake with those 495 that were very high-profile inmates, you would embarrass the president, you would embarrass the Attorney General, your director that you were working for could lose his job. So it was a different type of stress. In addition to managing, the country's monsters for the most part.
Everything had to be just right in line.
Had to be right on.
Did you have any personal interaction with any of those bad guys?
Yeah, I mean, when I was the public affairs officer, I spoke to every one of them every day.
Really?
Yeah, and so when we would have a media request, you would have to go and talk to Kaczynski or talk to Yusuf or talk to one of the bombers and say, hey, Time Magazine wants to interview you. Do you want to consent? Very seldom did they. Occasionally they would, but you would speak to them. So I get to know them very well. I knew Timothy McVeigh very well and Kaczynski and all those guys, because I spoke to them every day. And then as a warden, I was a very hands-on warden, so I walked my facility two or three times a week. So every one of those cells, I would stop by and I would talk to them, and and that's the way you kind of measure the the temperature of your facility. You saw what was going on. If you saw patterns of things that you may not want go on, you were able to get involved. And so talking to your staff, and so I spoke to all of these people all the time.
How did they react? Did they appreciate that?
Yeah. I think it's a respect thing, and if they see an administrator, I think that's just like a principal in a high school. If the principal's out talking to his staff and talking to there's a familiarity. They feel that you care about them, and you do care about them. So you're out there working with your staff. I was a very hands-on guy. I started at the very lowest line level staff in my agency, and I value those guys as much as I valued my associate wardens when I was a warden. So it was the only way that I could manage was to get out and talk to these inmates, and of course talking to your staff and finding out what's really going on, and not just hearing it from a supervisor maybe at a staff meeting.
Do you ever experience any kind of threats or any concerns for yourself?
Yeah, I had one threat that I can talk about, and I was at the Supermax, and I had a cartel leader, and the cartel leader, I stopped by the cell one day, and he said, how is your daughter Jordan doing and your son Tyler?
Ooh.
And said my kids by name, and
you hadn't told them that before.
And so they had known enough that who my children were. They had the ability. These were billionaires. I mean, guys that had unlimited resources, and that got my attention. I got his attention from that too. I placed him in, I isolated him for a long period of time, and by the time we had it was several months later, he apologized and said he stepped way over the line to do that. But I took this serious because he had I've had a lot of threats, but that was one threat that comes to mind as something that was of concern.
Have you ever had to have security then for yourself?
When I was the assistant director, I would travel with guys, and my drivers were always armed and had that. And I we didn't have as much security as they do now. When I was the assistant director, a friend of mine named Tom Clements was the director of prisons in Colorado, and I had talked to him on a Friday, and he was killed the following week by the person at his front door. And so after that, it kind of changed how a lot of the directors and a lot of the assistant directors carried themselves, because that assassination threat was there. And so that was and he had talked and asked me to come and work for him as his number 2 guy, and I was about ready to retire, and that really struck home to me. And so when I was working in the private prison area, we had a little bit more security, and after that with Tom, we had a lot more security in our escorts of dignitaries and just ourselves. We were a little bit more protected after that.
And tell me about GEO. It's the first time I've ever seen that one. I guess your resume. I didn't know what it was, and it's a private sector.
Yeah. How I learned about GEO was I was the deputy assistant director, and one of the divisions that we had was privatization. And what we did in the federal prison system was we contracted all of our criminal aliens that have been convicted to the private company, a private company called GEO, the GEO Group, or Corrections Corporation of America. And these 2 companies, and there was a third company, but they would contract with the federal government, and they would house our aliens, and then we, they would be deported, and they would do their federal sentences. So I got to know these companies, and a lot of the guys that I had worked with, my bosses and my boss's boss, were running these companies. And so when I retired, all 3 of the large companies that really dominated the industries wanted me to come work for them. I went to work for the GEO Group. The GEO Group was a facility, a company based in Boca Raton, Florida. It's a big company. We had 18,000 staff. We had about 70 facilities worldwide. I had prisons in South Africa, in Australia, in the UK, but we had about 65 right in the United States. And what we would do primarily is we would contract with state agencies and some of the federal agencies, and we would build and manage prisons in their entities, in their states. And we ran very clean, well-run prisons. It was a prison that the companies actually traded, just like 3M is traded on it. But we ran prisons for these states, and in most cases we ran them more efficiently than the states. They were facilities that the inmates within those states wanted to be at because they were cleaner, they were very well ran. Our recidivism rates were lower than the states, and we could just move a lot quicker, flex quicker, make a change quicker, and we were under a lot more scrutiny than a lot of the state and federal entities. And so it was an interesting place, and I worked for them for 8 years after I retired, and I retired as the president of the company. And one of the last things I did was to kind of help our company get through COVID, and that was a challenge in any place is COVID running through your prisons. So
Quickly back to the federal system. You were pretty high up in that system too, weren't you?
Yeah, I started as an officer and moved 10 different locations, and my last, I was the warden of the Supermax, and then did a decent job there, and they made me the assistant director. And at the time, the assistant director was the number 2 guy in the agency, and I had kind of control of operations. I had go-betweens by the 5 regions that we had. There were about 35,000 staff, and so I was based in Washington, D.C., but had kind of operational control over custody, reentry, prison release. I managed all of what people see as Con Air, but the transportation system. So I had 2 jets going around the country at any given time, and 100 buses moving inmates all over. I had all the designation and sentence computation center that was based in Texas. So anything that was computed or given by the federal judge as a commitment order, we maintained that. One of my divisions managed that. And terrorism to security to education to psychology, that were all under my umbrella at the time. And so it was interesting in a big job, but and very seldom was I not out on a Friday night with my wife having dinner when I wouldn't get calls that say there's a homicide here, or there's an escape attempt here, and so it was always something going on.
Well, coming from rural Minnesota, small town,
Yeah.
to where you were and where you what you did, were there things that you feel impacted your decisions in life growing up in Fairmont, Martin County?
Yeah, I think, and I thought a little bit about that, coming here this week to talk tonight, and I think it's the people that you worked with, and I look back in Martin County, what's had the biggest impact on me, and I think growing up, everybody that I knew and that I was with were hard workers, and I think everybody had a job. And I look back, and I was carrying Minneapolis Star and Tribunes at 11, and I did that until I could, mow yards for cash and recycle, and it just seemed like every one of my friends in the neighborhood, we all worked our butts off, from detasseling corns to just work ethic. So the entire time until you're 16 and working at Hy-Vee and working your way up from bag boy to checker to you name it.
Sure.
And we all worked hard here, and I think that served me well going into in college, working hard in college. But then when you got into your regular profession, you were always looking for a better job or working hard, and living in 12 different places around the country, I don't think people have the same type of work ethic outside of southern Minnesota that they have here.
Sure.
And the other thing is, I think this place gives you an educational background that a lot of places don't. I just took for granted that everyone can read and write and communicate well, and your teachers teach you with respect and cared about you. Moving my kids around 10 different locations, I know that's not the case. I know that's not the case. And the education system here is good. I really think the teachers gave a hoot about you, and they cared enough. I had a teacher named Mr. Johnson that was a math teacher, and I didn't want to take pre-calculus or advanced math, and he made my parents come in and actually tried to talk me out of taking and tell me I wouldn't amount to anything, and he did it because he cared, and I don't think teachers go to that extent in other places in this country, and to me, I think the teachers, the work ethic, and just how good people are, it rubs off on you. It sets a foundation, a base.
Especially early in life.
Yeah, it does, and it's things that at least living all over the country, and I've lived all over. You don't see that same type of thing all over. And when I came back from Washington D.C. in the middle of my moves with the career, and they moved me back to Rochester, Minnesota. I felt like I was home again. The people were kind. They cared about inmates and staff. They were conscientious. They didn't take sick leave unless they were sick, and just things that you felt you grew up in. You were back home, and you weren't necessarily in Fairmont, but you were in Rochester. You felt the same type of thing that you didn't feel maybe in the middle of Arizona or other places in this country.
Well, thank you very much for the interview and for speaking at our annual meeting tonight.
Yes.
And we didn't wake this guy up, I guess. He's still sleeping back there.
That's good. That's good. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks again.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Thank you.
All right.
Well, Lenny, that was a really great interview. Well, I really enjoyed hearing about Blake and his career and the things he's done. What do you think?
Oh, terrific accomplishments. Great guy, has really done a lot. Really great.
Well, we sure hope you enjoyed it. Wherever you're watching, thank you again, and we will see you on the next episode of Out of the Past.